Well, we know Prime Dragon Keeper Dragon will be banned, for sure. So that puts us with 2 combo decks against 2 mid-range decks. So realistically, you don't care which one you hit, you just want to hit one of the 2 mid-range lists. And there we go. PDK Dragon is banned. And it looks like Seraph Haven was banned instead of Dimensional Shift or PTP Forest. Interesting.
I suppose part of that is just Haven as a class, regardless of whether or not its main archetype is going to be Seraph or otherwise, has the most to deal with pressure and deal with mid-range decks. So perhaps Mensou, foreseeing that he might struggle the most against that class more than anything else, just bans it on that principle.
Right, the access to Themis Decree is pretty much just where he was going with that, I'm pretty sure. But this is what we're seeing. Lexan playing against 2 mid-range decks. It's not a matchup you'll see on ladder very much, but you know, historically this should be in Lexan's favor.
And that Shadow just gives so much time for a class like Forest to develop Shadows and find its pieces like Altered Fate, and it absolutely collapses in the face of PTP, or Path to Purgatory. 6 damage per turn from an amulet, and no way in the deck to destroy amulets. It's an endgame that Mensou has to prevent here by going as aggressive as possible, I believe.
Right, and I like that you just basically almost answered the question I was going to ask you, but if you were Mensou, you have no way of killing amulets. How do you attempt to beat Lexan, knowing it's open deck list, you know what he's playing? How do you try to beat him?
I'd say, as you said, I had started to develop on it. He plays out his followers as quickly as he can. Unfortunately, Lexan has had pretty prompt answers to them. But it seems that with the options left in his hand just being continued to cost followers, I'd say at the moment the best he can do is continue to play them and hope to resolve something. How he uses this soul conversion is very interesting to me, in that he has to slow down in order to continue to find more threats, but Forest, as we know, is an extremely fast class when it comes to development of Shadows and cycling out its hand.
I agree completely. He doesn't have access to Altered Fate or any meaningful evolves, really, so this turn is kind of weird for Lexan, but I agree with all of that, obviously.
So much fairy generation in this hand as well. I'd say it's smart to go either. I mean, I suppose it was his only thing he could do, but putting 2 fairies in the hand activates Glimmering Wings if he's not in too much pressure and can just simply go for the draw next turn.
And so getting a pretty excellent Prince Catacombs draw. I think that was great. He didn't really have much of a play until he got that, so.
Seems like Lexan here, due to drawing May there, is able to deal with this up to a point. He can get rid of almost everything except 1 skeleton if he chooses, and get his Glimmering Wings active at the same time.
Exactly, and that's what he goes for. He does just find more fairy generation, unfortunately, though. This is kind of like the plan of Lexan. It's pretty much just, you know, Mensou is going to always go face, pretty much, and Lexan's just going to try and clear the board every turn. So we'll probably actually see an evolve on this skeleton, even.
Now, it's interesting to think of how Mensou goes. I was thinking, actually, that's an interesting soul conversion to me.
Double dust.
Because I was imagining Soul Squasher plus Lyriel is a good way to take the board back here, but it also means that no matter what he did, he wouldn't be evolving to deal damage face. So he loses a bit of pressure in order to develop more into his deck.
That is true, and he did get a pretty good draw, so...
2 Death Breaths is a very difficult thing for Forest to deal with. The health is just right out of the range of any clears Forest can manage as well.
Let's see. So this is looking pretty... This is actually looking a little bit better for Mensou now that he'll have something stick. And it does not look like any AoE is played in this Forest deck. Yeah, there's an Airbound Barrage, but there's actually no Will of the Forest or Cassiopeia in the Forest deck, so...
I find that very, very interesting in that Forest tends to fall and rely upon those cards very much to deal with a lot of threats. I suppose that means Lexan is instead deciding to play as much Cycle in here as possible. Even at a glance, the Glimmering Wings and otherwise. There's a lot of card draw in here, and a lot of cards that allow him to play aggressively as well, like Elf Song. But when I see lists like that, this is a scenario that I'm very familiar with. which is he draws all of his fairy generators, and then his entire hand is fairies, and that's it. He has fairies and fairy generators, and is trying to find another sort of option that can help him develop into some other kind of play. But it's just not coming.
Right. I've also been in that same situation, and we see the fear going into Lex, and he actually uses a roach here defensively to kill another ward. He doesn't want Ether coming down to push any damage.
But in doing so, he does subject any sort of pressure he can place on the board or any reactive ability that he can get up to whatever he draws next, as his hand just continues to be nothing but tokens.
Completely true. It looks like, I imagine Mensou just goes with Skull Beast, Death's Breath, and goes face, just kind of like keep applying that pressure.
Altered Fate would be an amazing draw for Lexan here to be able to convert this hand into actual cards. Because I don't think that...
Realistically, that's exactly what he needs. Ooh, he goes for a... You got me saying Saber Altered. Dark Blade Fiend instead.
Might as well call it Saber Alter at this point. But I think that this is a very, very strong moment for Saber, in that this is the cleanest way to deal with the board immediately without having to take too much more value of damage from the Wood of Brambles.
I want a Skull Beast. I'm liking this a lot. I think he's going for... Obviously, this ward is going to go face, right? No, it actually trades. He's going to completely clear the board.
That's a very interesting way to play out the turn, is often I'll see a player go for as much pressure face as possible in this situation, as trading into fairies just gives Forest these conversions to shadows. But I think that play works out just fine, in that Saber Alter continues to tick as long as he gets these shadows, and Lexan still has nowhere to go yet.
Yeah, this is actually looking very terrible for Lexan. He's actually, I think, going to lose to himself if this continues. Dark Blade Fiend, like you said, if he keeps getting shadows, he only needs 2 to trigger it every turn, end of turn, so it's not that hard. And if he top decks an Ether here, that's a lot of face damage.
I suppose Lexan's only ability to really stay relevant on board here of just continuing to play fairies and hope that Wood of Brambles gives them enough pressure, it just isn't really going to work out in his favor.
I see Mensou just throwing his ward in to get space on the board.
Derives maximum value from that zombie party. I like this play a lot. And knowing clearing 1 fairy, assuming Lexan's hand continues to be this.
Another dead draw from Lexan drawing a water fairy. Oh no.
Still no way to deal with this Saber Alter. It's almost as if Mensou just realizes, after several turns of Lexan doing nothing but playing fairies, he's probably gotten the read that Lexan has a hand full of fairies.
Right. Well, if you can actually, keep track of all the generators, he's probably got about 8 of them, which is I'm pretty sure he's got 6, so.
That said,
now that the Fairy Whisperer is out of the bag, he knows that his hand is almost literally all fairies, so.
I'm trying to imagine what could have happened differently for Lexan here, but I think it's just generally unfortunate that this, it went down this way, in that he played pretty much as many tokens as he could every turn to stay on the board, but ultimately he's been locked in this situation where Mensou simply has lethal on board, and he continues to not really draw anything that helps him deal with it.
Right, this is the unfortunate dark side of the combo decks in Shadowverse. Sometimes they just lose to themselves.
Whoa, you're strong.
Gosh. I feel almost as though that wasn't a good representation of how Lexan has built this. Didn't really go his way, or the way that he intended for it to.
I mean, he made it to the streamed matches, so clearly he did something right. And Mensou just realized that, Lexan's hand was complete fairies and decided to apply the pressure necessary to end the game. And unfortunately for Lexan, he continued to draw nothing but basically fairies. So.
What an interesting list now that I really take a dive into Lexan's here, in that it plays 37 cards that cost between 1 and 2, and the only 3 others are the 3 paths of purgatory. So I suppose this is something...
Homie. Getting 30 shadows is hard, man.
It reminds me of something that's recently been popularized by Piao, another player, who combined aggro forest with PTP forest, simply to throw in fairies, get shadows off of them, and then convert aggro into a combo win condition, and have a good matchup against everything. But that perhaps is its greatest weakness.
Actually, aggro fairies is something that's more and more popular, I feel like, kind of really making use of tokens and Elf Song and whatnot. But I suppose when you put way too many fairy generators in the deck, it gets really, really slowed down. I wonder if there's some good mix of the two that you can justify playing PTP alongside that. But Lexan's going to take another swing at it, this time against Mid-Sword. We've already seen how much firepower Mid-Sword can gain with cards like Mars and whatnot. But do we feel like Lexan might have a better chance here?
At the moment,
Well, I mean,
Lexan seems to have
historically,
a
this
similar
matchup
opening.
should be good for PTP Forest. Also, I do want to point out that Mensou's version is not playing Floral Fencer, so he can't get the incredible Mars Floral Fencer of Volturn. So,
May the forest be at peace.
I'd say part of the great advantage of this type of list is that finding things to do in the early game against Sword is one of the biggest keys to succeeding at all or thriving in this matchup. And Wood of Brambles as a card tends to be all it takes to shut down Sword's early aggression. But even without it, he's run his other methods of dealing with early game followers. So there's a lot more that could potentially happen in the woodworks here.
ooh, I'm sure Lexan loves seeing that Mars. He can go face here with one of these fairies and then Airbound Barrage it back to hand, or just go face with Roach and Airbound Barrage the Roach.
Now that interests me a lot, this particular play, and then that's it's a very aggressive use of resources. It is demanding of Lexan to say that Mensou must do something, lest he will hold the board as a combo deck, and that's something I'm really not used to seeing. Unfortunately, it does play quite significantly into this White Paladin.
Right, White Paladin is kind of like the perfect answer to all of that.
Though, this White
Without
Paladin is
access
not
to a
the
Wood of
the board.
Brambles or a another Airbound Barrage, it's going to be actually awkward to clear this Paladin out of the board.
Right. And unfortunately, if he wants to get the 2 draws from Glimmering Wings, he won't have enough play points left in order to draw something like Elf Song or Wood of Brambles to clean it up. But he does figure out some pretty good options here.
But again, Lexan's in the same like sort of phase he was in last time, where he's not got any cycling in his hand. He needs to find Altered Fates. And he's up to his deck's mercy at drawing them at this point.
Right. That is sort of the problem we saw last game of not finding Altered Fates, not being able to convert things, not even really finding enough shadows without more than one Altered Fate to make a good draw off of just simply finding a path to Purgatory. It means that Lexan eventually just runs out of ways to deal with things.
Exactly. Well, next turn, once the Roach is used, probably he's got maybe Lily to come down, but I don't know if that can handle Council of Card Knights Albert sort of pressure.
Council of Card Knights seems like it would be especially brutal against Forest in any situation where they haven't found a Wood of
Round
Brambles
Table.
or anything.
Oh gosh, Round Table pulls Mars and White Paladin. Oh no. Could evolve the
One
White Paladin
trade.
again. Oh my gosh, these wards. Oh no.
Gets 2 off. It's something that I've found very interesting about this particular interaction here, is that it seems Round Table is very dependent sometimes, or you get a lot of additional value off of it if Mars is pulled first. As you can see, the White Paladin didn't get the Mars effect on it because Mars was pulled
Right.
in the latter order. It makes me wonder if that is most of the time when I see this happen, it doesn't really seem to make a significant difference either way, as Mensou still derives the same amount of advantage he needs to just hold onto the board here with it. The Wood of Brambles
Which is kind of the
a
reason
little
why
bit
that quote unquote combo is playable in the first place, really, is because you don't care, usually.
We might find ourselves in another situation where Lexan... Is he aiming that at more? I was about to say, he doesn't have a very clean way of getting through these wards and taking the Mars off the board to deplete this pressure, so he instead goes for a very slow play in just transforming her into a snowman.
I mean, it gets the effect off the board, right? This is highly unfortunate for Lexan, though. He is 100% at his deck's mercy right now. He needs to draw Altered Fate into anything useful, really, so he can trigger the Fairy Whisper, he can trigger Fairy Circle, and dump into a more useful hand.
It's usually right here on the edge of turn 5 going forward that Sword will be able to non-stop deal damage face from hand. As we can see, he has so many outlets of it already.
Forget me. Just
And Lexan plays to
Also,
mitigate it as
something
much as
usually
possible.
characteristic of PTP forest decks is healing, and Lexan's not playing any of it. All damage
Right.
done to Lexan is permanent, so
And so simply electing to throw down the 2 Novice Troopers all he can, knows that all he has to do is continue to deal damage, and Lexan is just not responding to it anyway. Nature's Guidance is going to be an option for drawing, but with only one, I feel that he might just not make it here.
looks like he's really hoping this hits Altered Fate. I'm not sure if it would matter even, though. I think you have to evolve this very first. Or even use the Roach here, maybe?
At this point against Sword, knowing how much damage he probably has to deal with, I very much could see a realistic approach in taking the Rhinoceros, but decides against it.
Looks like he's gonna Flood instead. Interesting. Okay.
So sparkly.
So I guess that would leave Mensou just short of lethal after he plays this Albert. That'd be
Oh,
5-9
no.
plus 2.
5, 9,
5-9-2,
10, 12.
and 5-4-2.
Oh, no, yeah.
1 point off, in fact.
5, 9, 10, 11, yeah.
And what's interesting is I think he does have a pretty strong impetus to do it here. In that this Albert is a lot of burst damage, but at any moment Lexan has some explosive draws in Altered Fate. He could very quickly generate an immense amount of shadows if he just simply gets 2 in a row. Though I don't think that 2 Altered Fates would actually activate a PTP, so Lexan's position really doesn't seem to be improving, no matter how I try to dice this.
Yeah, Lexan is going to get hit for 11 face this turn. I think every way you dice it, never mind, he's being traded into. Okay, that's interesting. Goes for a Council, banishing the Ward and banishing the Bane, sorry, instead of the Albert. Very, very interesting.
I actually like that a lot in that it plays for a lot of damage. And that means Mensou is making the active decision that he doesn't need the ward because he knows Lexan's list does not run any follower that goes larger than a 1 or 2 drop.
I think I don't like that play in the sense that if Lexan, by some grace of God, cleared this board, Albert can't finish the game. So I don't like that play at all, really. But we'll see what happens.
At the same time, with this being open decklist, I guess Mensou could be deciding he knows this decklist. How possibly could Lexan clear this without, like... He only runs 1 Airborne Barrage, did I see that correctly? I think
He runs 2.
Yeah, no, 2.
No, 3, actually.
No,
1 is
3.
alt art. 2 are alt art, 1 is not.
The Archer art just baits me. But I suppose without drawing all 3 of them in that circumstance or throwing in Roaches, which just continues to deplete him of resources, nothing he do particularly answers this. And so I think it was a pretty safe and interesting way to
Double
go.
Altered Fate into PTP, did that not do it?
I think he was at 13 shadows before his board was cleared, and he had about, what was it, 6 or 7 cards in hand? So doubled Altered Fate would be adding about 6-5. So he'd be pretty, I think, just short of it. But,
Woody? Okay.
interesting. It's been a long time since I've had any experience casting PTP Forest. Counting shadows and stuff makes me so nostalgic.
I didn't take note of what was in his hand prior. The play that didn't play around Albert was, ooh.
Yeah, and Mensou will end up being able to close it out, which means Lexan, 2 times on the PTP Forest, seemed to hit this wall where he just got flooded with tokens and nothing much else. And that's actually a very real thing, right? Kind of how you construct your PTP Forest deck is so important, because drawing it...